Well, it's true. We all know this. If we haven't experienced it yet, one day we are going to experience pain. And the person next to you is going to experience pain. And the people that are on your contact list are going to experience pain. The people on your Facebook feed are going to experience pain. The people on Twitter, on Instagram, the people in your workplace, the people in your school, the people in your home, we're all going to experience pain and suffering at some level. And as believers, we're put in quite an awesome place to both be people who experience suffering and yet also be called upon for others that are suffering. And bad news is rampant. It's a lot of it. We embrace that. We were just hearing about some of those things that Mark was sharing, right? About his friend Eric losing 2 children. Like, wow. The story of Job is God's story, and it told about suffering in a way that is 100% relatable, 100% accessible, 100% transparent, and helpful in so many ways. And the story of Job, if we want to just rehearse this story, is essentially God pointing out the unbelievable godliness of this man named Job. And Job is someone who is looked at as community, who's very, very wealthy, very, very blessed, and seeks to bless others in his life. And he is a man that has kind of this gravitational pull in his community. And in God holding all of the angelic world accountable, one of those who comes to his charge is Satan, the accuser, right? The tempter. And in all of his goings out, God has this conversation with him and says, "Where have you been? Where are you going?" And he's like, going to and fro. And he says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one righteous like him on the earth. He's blameless in his ways." And so, he's just like that because you've given him all these good things. Man, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't, like you or want to be like you if you're going to give him all these good things? And the Lord's like, well, take them. Go ahead, take them. Take those things away and take everything up to his life. And then, don't touch him at all, but you can touch everything in his life. And essentially, one thing happens after another, and we see this in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Job, that systematically, like compressed-wise, he loses everything. He loses all of his possessions, like his wealth, and his flocks and his houses, right? And then his children start to die, right? He loses his children. All 10 of them are gone. And then he's left with just him and his wife, and they're sitting there just going like, oh my goodness, reeling from this. And yet Job doesn't sin in the process, and he goes, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. There it is, a testament to God's grace in his life. He gets it. He doesn't need all those things in order to be loved by the Lord. And then Satan comes back and says, let's go all the way with this. Take his health, right? And the Lord says, go for it. Take everything up to his life. And so what happens? He gets these horrific boils that are on him. I don't know if you've seen people who have been struck with this. It's a plague, really. And this dude's got hard sores that are just oozing all over his body. So on top of grieving all of that, now he's sitting in this pit where he's got to get sticks to scratch because he's in now constant agony. Physically, as it's like matching his spiritual state in a sense. It's crazy. And then his wife comes along and says, curse God and die. That's exactly what Satan wants him to do, and he doesn't. And he says, what? Who says this? That's foolishness. That's madness. And he maintains his steadfastness towards the Lord. And in chapter 2 after that, for his first counselor is his wife. Not a very helpful counsel there, right? And then we've got his friends finally show up, right? The cavalry comes. His posse finally shows up. And we read this in Job chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. And this is the best you're going to see his friends. Because if you've read the book of Job, and it's 42 chapters long, you'll realize that essentially this becomes the starting point for Job after these 7 days to start talking about his grief. He finally opens up. He's finally comfortable enough to actually put words to what he's feeling. And he just starts going off into his misery. And these counselors have no idea how to deal with this. They are ill-equipped to handle this kind of grief. And this is what the Lord's going to say at the end of Job about these counselors. He's going to be very angry with them. In Job 42:11, then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house, and they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. When his family shows up, they actually go, let's help you. And they love and support him in ways that his counselor friends wouldn't. And what's going to happen is that the Lord is going to show up and be like, no. Verse 7 of Job 42. After the Lord has spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. And how often have we been in a spot where we have no idea what to tell the person in our life that's suffering? We're going to dive into this. And this is going to hit us right at our hearts. And our big idea this morning is going to be this. The gospel guides how we comfort the suffering. We don't have to look any further than the gospel of Jesus Christ to find a guide as to how we go towards this. The gospel guides how we comfort the suffering. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how these counselors missed the gospel. They missed it. And what happens is there's misfires all over the place. And there's 5 ways in which we don't have to follow in those mistakes. So here's a cautionary tale for us, right? So the first one is this: as his counselors start to open up and tell stories, or tell Job responding to his grief, what we need to do, here's how the gospel helps us. We need to embrace the limits of our understanding. The gospel, the love of Jesus Christ for sinners like us, is beyond comprehension. We don't understand all of the complexities. No one does, except for the Lord. And in the midst of pain and suffering, if we just applied this notion that we don't have it all figured out, and here's the cool thing, we don't have to. We don't have to. We can embrace the limits of our understanding. So first, let's look at Job chapter 8 here. Here's what's fascinating is that Bildad here is going to demonstrate that he, on the one hand, is going to exclaim, oh, we can't know the mind of God. We can't figure it all out. But on the other hand, what's going to happen is he's going to start to pontificate. You got to fill the time, right? Some people don't like dead air space. They got to fill it with something. Can't have awkward silences. Music, right? Or audiobook or whatever, right? Or introvert nightmare, talking. And here, all of a sudden, Bildad, along with Eliphaz and Zophar, feeling the need to talk. And this is what Bildad says. He says, if you seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. And though your beginning was small, your latter days will be very great. For inquire, please, of bygone ages, and consider what the fathers have searched out. For we are but of yesterday and know nothing. For our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words out of their understanding? Now, what's so frustrating about Job's friends is they get some things right and they get some things really, really wrong, because they don't necessarily practice what they preach. And here, what's interesting in verse 9, for we are but of yesterday and know nothing. So there's a certain, the limits of our knowledge. There's so many limits. Yet, what does he do? If you will seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. Malarkey! He doesn't know that. He has no idea what the Lord's plan is. And that's the point. That's the point of chapter 1 and chapter 2, is you get the huge window into the suffering, and you realize Job's suffering because he's righteous. So here it is. We don't know the mind of God, and yet they're sitting here pontificating, and particularly Bildad here is pontificating that he thinks he knows the Lord here and can anticipate the Lord's understanding. And in verse 20 of chapter 8, Bildad will continue. And here's something that we got to circle this, and go, here's a fundamental overstatement of the facts and betrays some really, really significant problems in his theology. Verse 20 of Bildad says, behold, God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. Let's engage with that for a second here. What's wrong with this? Or we could say, what's right with this? Is there anything right with this statement? Go ahead. He's not going to reject Job. Okay. Mm-hmm. But what's the assumption by Bildad here?
Your works, the way you live, your works, God will honor that.
Go ahead. What was that?
Gain favor.
You can. Okay. Yeah. I saw a hand over here.
Well, I think the assumption is that suffering is an evidence of rejection.
Yes. And ipso facto, or what does that mean? What does he think of Job?
Job's sinful.
Job's not blameless. Right? Go ahead. I saw Rob over here.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly right. He's making this assumption that suffering doesn't happen to righteous people. So you must have done something wrong. And I'm telling you, we need to hear this. We need to hear how wrong that is. Okay? And can I give some examples of what we've done as not just our Cornerstone, but evangelicals have done? Katrina was a big hurricane that came and devastated New Orleans. You know some of the horrific things I heard evangelicals say? They deserve that. Breaks my heart. They look at them. There's a voodoo culture. Yeah, they deserve that. If they do what's right, they're going to be blessed. And what that betrays is that we actually get God at some level, but we have no idea what the Lord's doing. We have no idea. We know he's good, but we don't know how he's applying that goodness in many ways. And so here's what they miss. If you believe that, you know what? You just missed the gospel. Why? Who was blameless for us? What?
Oh, nobody was except Christ.
Christ was blameless for us. This kind of understanding is essentially squashing out the category of the gospel. Because what Job helps us grasp is that there can be a righteous one who can suffer, a blameless one who can suffer. So this is huge. The limits of their understanding, essentially what's Bildad going, the gospel can't be real. It can't be true. That's so significant. And again, we get this rebuke from the Lord at the end of the book about how they're not getting it, right? You have not spoken of me what is right. And notice he says, as my servant Job has. Throughout this whole time, Job doesn't get to a point where he actually accuses God of being evil. He never does that. Right? Or gets to the point of saying, like, this can't happen. So this is very significant. So what does this mean? This means if we embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ, we have to embrace our limits. Because we don't know everything. And we don't know where this may lead. And the suffering that we have, that we or our friends may experience, or our family may experience, we don't know what the Lord may be doing in that midst. So let's not sit here and spout off, pontificating as though we have to make sense of everything. Isn't that free? Freeing, not to sit here and think I have to have all the answers and tell everyone what's what and how it all works out. It's the Lord's job. Number two, second thing is that, you know what we can do in the midst of pain and suffering for others? We can focus on the grace of God through his promises. You just got a taste right there that these guys are slanted towards an inversion of the gospel. If you do good things will happen to you. If you do right, won't things go well for you? Zophar commits this atrocious misstep in Job 11. He says, if you prepare your heart and you will stretch out your hands toward him, right? In other words, if you repent, because clearly you've done something wrong, you're wrong with God because of this, somehow. So you got to get right with him, right? Verse 14, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and let not injustice dwell in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear. You will forget your misery, and you will remember it as waters that have passed away, and your life will be brighter than the noonday. Its darkness will be like the morning, and you will feel secure, because there is hope. You will look around and take rest in security. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this? Go ahead. What's wrong here?
Oh, in 14 he's saying iniquity, it's sin. He's
Right.
accusing him of having sin.
Right. Right. First thought is, when you're comforting somebody, let's try not to start accusing them of things. Huh? Step one. Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
He's also kind of, in verse 17 and 18, he's kind of making promises that God necessarily didn't make.
Amen.
He's writing checks that he's expecting God to cash.
Right. Verbal checks that, yeah, exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, hey, if you just do what's right, things will go well for you. And how many of us have either heard this counsel or given it to others at some level? Right? We're all guilty of it. But where's the focus here?
Self.
You need to do something. You need to do, here, if you want hope, you need to do something. And actually, the opposite's true. Our hope is in that God's doing something. Our hope is in His promises through grace. If you carefully read Job, you'll notice they never mention the people that he's lost. They'll never talk about them. It becomes this academic exercise and focused on, dude, you got to do something. Rather than like, oh, wow, well, let's just keep looking at the Lord here. They're not going, let's pray. Let's consider what the scriptures have to say, right? That's not where they're going. Eliphaz in chapter 22 also doesn't help. Eliphaz says, agree with God and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive instruction from His mouth and lay up His words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be built up. If you remove injustice far from your tents, if you lay gold in the dust and the gold of Ophir among the stones of the torrent bed, then the Almighty will be your gold and your precious silver. What's he saying here, right? There's some really amazing things he's saying here, but then there's some things that are just inverted, right? Verse 24 and 25 are beautiful verses. Some beautiful thoughts there. Yeah, absolutely. Like God being our gold, absolutely, right? But what's the accusation? God hasn't been your gold. There's something wrong. If you just go be at peace, you're clearly not at peace with God. And we all do this, don't we? When bad things happen, our first thought must be something we did. Something we did's wrong. And we're thinking, how can I somehow control this and fix this? Aren't we? And here, Eliphaz commits the same error, doesn't he? And there's no gospel here. This isn't the gospel. Right? There's no good news here. It's, here, manufacture your own hope. And here's what's interesting, is in the gospel, up until this time, there's at least a gospel that was preached to Adam or Abraham that could have been of news here, right? Abraham's story of not having a child, right? And here he is 100 years old having a child who's actually going to be the one who's going to rescue the world, right? In the garden, Adam and Eve were not sent out without promises. They were sent out saying, oh, no, I'm going to crush the head of the serpent, right? And not only that, what did he do? He clothed them on the way out. So there's all these gestures. That's not here, right? But what's our great promise that we have in the gospel? You know what it is? Is we have the greatest of promises. We have perfect comfort promised us. This is what Revelation 21 is all about. The book of Revelation is a book of comfort. And this is where it begins to end. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And He who is seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And He said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. The book of Revelation is essentially a gospel invitation for the suffering church. And what God is offering and what He's offers to say, I'm going to be there with you and I'm going to give you perfect comfort forever. And so this is the gospel. This is where it leads us. It leads us to the presence of God and Him literally going, I have you personally. I'm going to take those tears and I'm going to be there wiping them for you. It's incredible. So this is where the gospel leads us. The third thing that we can learn through negative example here, right, is consider how to learn together. It's to consider how to learn together. The big mistake, not the big mistake, but a huge mistake that the comforters of Job make is that they close their minds to any facts or any statements that Job makes that contradicts their assumptions. In other words, they're unteachable in the process. We have something to learn when those we love and care about are going through tragic, painful situations. It's a community project. And we've got something to learn in the process. So think of this in chapter 11, right? Zophar. As they're listening to Job, and it becomes this kind of 3-round dialogue, right? Job makes a statement, and then he gets these. It's the give and take with all these three. Then there's another round with he makes a statement, and then these three respond with his statements. And then there's another one. There's 3 of these, right? Zophar is responding to Job and says, "Should a multitude of words go unanswered? And a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble silence men, and when you mock, shall no one shame you? For you say, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. But oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you, and that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves." Anybody feel comforted by that? So what's wrong here? What's wrong here?
You deserve this, man. You're telling God that, God's exacting justice, and you're mocking him for it.
And beyond that, right? He's sitting here going, I cannot be silent about this. How are you just going to keep mocking? Zophar is going like, we can't just let all this go. We can't just let this guy grieve. We got to correct him. So all of a sudden, anything that he says, right, even the words, they throw it back in his face. You say, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. It's like almost mocking the guy. How could you possibly say you're blameless? They can't even get over that. They can't even be like, you know what, maybe you're right. Maybe this, and consider the whole other side of this. You know what I mean? They can't even imagine that what they're thinking is wrong. So there's no humility here. They're unteachable. Because they assume, and aren't we all like this, when we see others suffering, we want to fix it, don't we? Right? Parents, see your little one. They did something and they are just oozing with tears, aren't they? Right? Maybe even bleeding, right? And what's the first thing you want to do? Fix it, right? Fix it. Oh, what's the problem, right? Happens all the time, right? And it may just mean, why don't we just go, I don't know what's happening. Why don't I just start asking questions and learning through this process? And it may just mean they need a hug. But all of a sudden, when you start coming at them, people who are suffering, this is incredible, right? There's people around us that are going through this stuff. I wish I would be more kind to my parents this way. Right? The most intimate relationships in our family that we have, we're more likely to do this to them. Like we don't have anything to learn in the process. I've got better vision than you do about your situation. Man. Then Eliphaz, Job 15, right? Are you the first man who was born? Like I gotta recover from that question. What a jerk. Oh my gosh. Oh, Eliphaz. Oh. And I know because I've done this kind of thing to people before. Are you the first man who was born? Or were you brought forth before the hills? Have you listened in the counsel of God? And do you limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? What do you understand that is not clear to us? Both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, older than your father. Are the comforts of God too small for you? The word that deals gently with you? Are you not comforted by my words? Why are you still crying? I've told you the truth. What do you know that we don't know? You're not smarter than us. Look at the posture. Oh, Eliphaz, I want to have a talk with you, buddy. Can we? I don't have to because the Lord already did, but yeah, Lee, go for it, buddy.
It's just because Job was a really wealthy dude,
Mm.
and like it tickles at it in text, but it doesn't actually like say it outright. That like maybe his friends were like jealous of his wealth, and like they're like, finally that guy got his comeuppance.
Right. And that's kind of how that's kind of what's happening here. It's what it can feel like, right? And here's the crazy part, right? Is not only are we sitting back and learning from their experience and Job's experience, here we are thousands of years later, right? But they're going to have to learn from Job. This is where the story goes, right? In chapter 42, verse 8. After all is said and done, after the Lord appears and speaks to him, and Job, even though the Lord doesn't say he needs to repent, he repents. And then he says, now therefore, take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job, to these friends, as he's rebuked them. And he says, go up and offer a burnt offering for yourselves, and my servant Job shall pray for you. For I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Boof. They weren't there to learn. They weren't there to actually enter into the grief with him. They were there to try to fix him, because this guy's got nothing to complain about, is really what they're saying. Why are you whining? That's kind of what it sounds like, right? So consider how to learn together. This is what we have to do. So the gospel teaches us. We're all disciples together. And he teaches us through pain. Number 4, ask more questions, make less statements. Ask more questions, make less statements. We've all heard the notion. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. 2 more ears. 2 more avenues of listening than we do of speaking. Yet typically we talk twice as much as we listen. That needs to change. Let's go back to the actual biological equation, 2-to-1 ratio here. Is it possible for us to ask more questions and make less statements? Doesn't James tell us this right off the bat, right, in James' letter? Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And what you find here is that counselors who are helping to bear the weight of grief for others are very concerned about their energy quotients. And they may be pushing back, and they may get angry that this is taking too long. I've been there. This is very inefficient, said the husband to his wife about why she was crying over ... I don't have time for this. Can't you see all the good things? Why are you so clouded? And all of a sudden, this is where the rebukes and accusations start to come, because it's coming out of anger. And what happened in Job's counselors, those friends, they moved from gentle probing to harsh rebuke. They went from asking questions to making harsh statements. Eliphaz, again, sorry to keep picking on Eliphaz here. Verse 2. Should a wise man answer with windy knowledge and fill his belly with the east wind? Think about it. This is what he's saying. Job's like airing of grief is like windy knowledge and the east wind. Like, dude, you're full of air, hot air. And am I going to be filled with that? No. Should he argue in unprofitable talk or in words which he can do no good? With which he can do no good? But you are doing away with the fear of God and hindering meditation before God. For your iniquity teaches your mouth, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. For your mouth condemns you, and not I, your own lips testify against you. Ouch. A friend of mine, his name is Tom, experienced a Job-like proposition. He, in the same year, he lost his wife through divorce, got divorced, his wife left him, cheated on him, left him. Then he lost his job. Could not find a job. Took him years to be able to find a new job. This is in the economy tanked in 2009, 2010. And then, guess what? Couldn't find a job, lost the house. And was living in essentially homeless shelters with his 3 children. Now, that's a lot to process, isn't it? A lot to handle. And imagine if I said, hey, Tom, dude, I am so sick of hearing you talk about this. Dude, all I hear is you just spouting off really, really stupid, lofty ideas and bad theology. I got to correct this. This is bad. Your own words condemn you. And not only that, dude, I don't see any fear of God. And you know what? You're hindering meditation before God. You're actually cramping my style. Does that sound compassionate? Does that sound caring? Does that sound sympathetic? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because they're in a position where they want to come and teach, or they want to come and correct, rather than just sitting quietly and helping them to think out loud, which is often what we need when we're grieving. So, leads us to the last kind of point here, and this really punctuates the gospel for us in a whole other way, is that the fifth way in which we can comfort those who are suffering is to put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in their shoes. This is what empathy is. This is what empathy is. Empathy is going, I can't imagine, or maybe I'm going to try to imagine what life for you is like right now. And you can hear it in statements when you know when people are empathetic, when they come to you and be like, oh my God, I can't even imagine being like that. I can't even imagine losing my kids. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine losing all of those things. I can't even imagine, like, whatever that loss may be, whatever that grief may be, you start to actually go, what would my life be like if I were in that spot? And this is what slows us down. This is probably what bears the most fruit, I think. And why? Jesus told us to be this way, didn't he? What did he say in Matthew 7? He said, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So here it is. Here it is. He's saying, put yourself in their shoes. Whatever pain and suffering your friends may be encountering. And they failed miserably, didn't they, as counselors? In Job 3, we start to get Job's anguish, his grief starts pouring out of him like a fountain, right? Let the day perish on which I was born. and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days. Right? You start to see this is his anguish. Actually, there's one more verse, isn't there, Derek? There we go. Verse 6. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Can anybody here help us with the stages of grieving? Does anybody know what the stages of grieving are? Okay.
I think the first is anger. Denial?
Yes. Right. Yes, it's denial. Okay. It's denial. Right. Denial is the first piece of it. And then anger is typically follows right there. Okay.
Italian,
It comes natural, right? Go ahead, Lee. What you got, buddy?
Bargaining.
Bargaining. What's bargaining?
Trying to cut a deal with the situation, trying to figure out a way to like make it better, fix it.
That's right. If only I had done this. If only I had changed this. If only I had, right? So, right, you go from denial to anger to bargaining, and then what's next?
Depression.
That's right, sadness and depression, right? He is, if you think about where he is in the process here, he's probably, you could probably say, I mean, these stages, and we'll talk more about these stages next week, but these stages are fluid to a degree. They're not sequential that you always go through them. But right here, he's voicing, he's like, he's kind of working towards acceptance here. And part of that, he's sad about it. He's sad about it. So he's in a process of grieving here, right? And what happens is, if we can understand that, then we can actually enter into that with someone and maybe even walk through those stages together. We'll talk about that more next week. What does that look like, right? And Job is trying to help them to understand what it is like for him. He even says in Job 19, what does he say? My breath is strange to my wife, right? Or his talk. And I am a stench to the children of my mother. Even young children despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. All my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I loved have turned against me. My bones stick to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. He's expressing his anguish and grief. He's expressing his sadness. And he's trying to help you understand what it's like for him. And this is part of what it's like when we comfort each other. We put ourselves in their shoes, and we're not going to sit there and turn against them. This is the way Job felt about his friends that sat with him for 7 days and cried with him and said nothing. And then as soon as he opens his mouth, they're all over the guy. And what's incredible is that Jesus in his life is the answer. God became one of us. In the gospel, literally, is God empathizing with us. It's the God of heaven stepping into skin to look at our lives from a point of view perspective. And he's going to go through all of the stages of human experience. And that's going to include grief. Big time. And Jesus, in his ministry, even in just before, weeks before, he's going to give his life for us in sacrifice. He's going to take the judgment of God on our behalf. What he does is he actually becomes the ultimate Job. No one starts to get what's happening. But he doesn't sit there and go, poor me. You know what he did? He stayed focused on all of these things, and he kept going through pain and suffering. And Jesus had friends. He had lots of friends. But he had some very, very close friends. And we read about this in John 11. In John 11, we read about him losing his friend Lazarus. Does anybody know who Lazarus was? He was the brother of Mary, Mary Magdalene, right? And she was the one who washed Jesus' feet with her hair. This is the kind of woman that she is. She took that fragrant, I don't know if it's the tears, the oil, it was oil. She took the oil and and everyone's like, "Ooh, that's gross," right? That's the kind of person Mary was. She became a very close, intimate friend of Jesus. And when Lazarus died, Jesus knew what was going to happen. Matter of fact, Jesus delayed so that he would die. What? You're going to allow that to happen? And Jesus got an earful every time he talked to somebody about it. If you were only here. And Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. He's going to use this to put the glory of God on display through the resurrection and new creation. There's a blessing coming, and he knows it. And yet, he goes into this with empathy. Read about this. Matter of fact, would you just read this with me? This is so beautiful. Just 8 verses or 9 verses. Let's just read this together. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, just stop. Let's go back there. Just stop. If he could have very easily been like, "Oh, so you're putting this on me?" He could have very easily had a jaded response to this. "Oh my gosh, these people just don't get it." He could have very easily been cold about this because he knows the outcome. Let's keep reading. Verse 33, let's read together. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone laid against it. Even though Jesus can fix everything, and even though he knows what's going to happen, he goes, "This is my brother, Lazarus. I love him. And I can see, this is why I'm dying. This is why I've come to die. So I can prevent this forever." And he saw, this is our God. He saw it from our perspective, and he was broken by it. John 10:35, one of the greatest verses ever, short, sweet, says everything you want to see about a Savior. And he is the gospel for us. And this is how he comes, and he comforts with his love. The gospel guides how we comfort the suffering because the gospel is our ultimate comfort. And Jesus embodies that in all of who he is. And we're going to close here with 2 Corinthians 1. And here's what Paul can grasp from all this. A man who's also, right, if you think about Jesus, a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. And Paul can say, there's something that could happen through this. Can we read this together? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For as we share abundantly in Christ's sufferings, so through Christ we share abundantly in comfort too. That's our good news, friends. That's our good news. And it guides us as to how we can counsel each other. So let's pray and ask for the Lord's help, and then Chris is going to come and lead communion for us.